This is the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and there's more to see here than first meets the eye, more than you might expect. Let's take a look. My name is Jack, I make videos about all things tech, consider subscribing if you're new here. I've been using the 15 Pro Max for about a couple of weeks now, and there's some notable changes this year that have gotten quite a lot of attention, like the USB-C port. But there's improvements elsewhere, particularly with the design and the cameras, that really make for some nice quality of life improvements. Now I'm going to start by addressing the elephant in the room. We're way past the point where yearly upgrades make sense for most people. You don't need to upgrade from a 14 Pro or Pro Max unless you're a bit of a tech geek like me and you want the latest features, which we'll dig into. But if you've got an iPhone 11 or 12, then the culmination of yearly upgrades really starts to add up to something a lot more significant. Starting off with the design, we've got this all-new titanium finish on the 15 Pros, much more of a matte look versus the glossy stainless steel from recent years. Holding this for the first time, there are 4 things that I noticed right away. Firstly, the weight. The titanium design makes this around 10% lighter than the previous stainless steel, but it actually feels a lot lighter than that, while still feeling like a really solid and premium build that we come to expect from Apple. Secondly, the brush sides are way less fingerprinty than before. Noted on the black titanium, you do get these kind of dark rings that build up around the buttons, which do wipe off. It's not permanent or anything, but if that bothers you, it's much less noticeable on the lighter colours like the natural I have here and the white compared to the darker black or the blue. Thirdly, this feels just way nicer to hold in the hand. There's no hard edge like before. The frame now contours and curves around to the front and back glass, making it just so much nicer and more comfortable to hold. And lastly, the bezels are just a bit narrower too, making both Pro phones ever so slightly smaller overall, but with the same size screens as last year. A 6.1 inch on the Pro and 6.7 inch on the Pro Max. The same Super Retina XDR displays with 120Hz ProMotion for smooth scrolling and always on. In Apple's photos, the natural kind of looks a bit brown or bronze, which actually put me off it at first. It definitely isn't. In person, it's a very metallic grey that shifts between lighter and darker tones as the light hits it. It's really nice, and it definitely seems to be the most popular option this year when I ask you guys in a poll. Overall, it's familiar but different. A lot of smaller changes that add up to a nice refinement of the design from the last few years. So, what is new here? Well, ever since the very first iPhone, there's been a mute switch just above the volume buttons. That's now been replaced by the action button, which still mutes the phone by default when you hold it down for a second. There's 2 distinct haptic patterns, so you can tell the difference between muting and unmuting with the phone in your pocket. A nice touch. There's a new action button section in settings with this crazy UI that looks nothing like any of the other settings pages. You can set the button to toggle a specific focus mode, launch the camera, toggle the torch, or start taking voice note. Or you can choose a shortcut to run and do pretty much anything, like open a specific app or run through a series of more complex commands to start turning on some smart home accessories and playing a playlist. It's a really nice addition, and I wasn't expecting Apple to add something so versatile. They're not really known for letting the user have a lot of customization, so it's good to see. But I can't help feel that it's just in the wrong place. It's really hard to reach one-handed, particularly on the Pro Max. You have to do a bit of an awkward shuffle. It would be much better maybe on the opposite side under the lock button. And as other reviewers have pointed out, it would be nice to have multiple commands assigned to it, maybe for like a double or triple press, like we already have with the back tap feature. That said, I have seen some pretty clever workarounds. You can assign to it a shortcut that essentially opens up a menu with a bunch of quick options, which is pretty clever. I'll link to Steven's video below if you want to learn how to build something like this. Let me know some cool shortcuts you've made in the comments. Also new this generation, we get a new port, or should I say the same port that pretty much any new piece of tech from the last few years has been using, even including most of Apple's other devices. They finally ditched the slow lightning port for USB-C, which I'm sure is totally Apple's own decision and nothing to do with some EU legislation about to come into force at the end of next year. So thanks to the EU, we can now use a single cable to charge our MacBooks, iPads, action cameras, gimbals, power banks, and the AirPods Pro if you get the new revised version with the C port on the case. Now the standard 15 also gets the C port, but it is still using the same old slow USB 2 data transfer speeds that Lightning had. Only the 15 Pros get USB 3, which is up to 20 times faster than before. There is a reason for that, which I'll get to, but now with up to 10 gigabits per second data transfer, it just makes it much less of a pain getting big files off the phone. I transferred just over 40 gigabytes of ProRAW photos and ProRes video to my Mac in about 3 minutes. So much faster than before. But to take advantage of that, you do need to have a cable that supports USB 3. The braided cable in the box is just what Apple calls a charge cable, which still only supports the USB 2 data transfer speed. And for once, this isn't Apple being stingy Apple. This is pretty standard whenever you buy a USB-C smartphone. That's just because the faster cables are noticeably thicker and more costly. I picked up this one from Anker, which is actually pretty affordable considering it goes beyond USB 3 and supports Thunderbolt 4. Now that the iPhone has USB-C, that alone could tempt some people to upgrade, maybe even switch from an Android. I ran a poll asking which feature you guys were most excited about, and USB-C won it for both the standard and Pro phones, with the new titanium design coming in second. So thanks to everyone who voted in that. This year also sees us get a new chip with the A17 Pro. This is Apple's first 3nm chip and the first iPhone chip to be given the Pro name. Usually they just stick Bionic on the end, like last year's A16 Bionic, which has now been given to this year's standard iPhone 15. The A17 Pro has a new USB controller for enabling those much faster 10 gigabit per second data transfers, hence the standard 15 being stuck with USB 2 speeds with last year's chip. This new chip has a 10% faster CPU, which, yeah, you're not going to notice a big difference day to day, but navigating the phone and switching apps all feels really responsive, as we've come to expect from Apple Silicon. Here's some benchmarks for anyone wanting some numbers compared to last year. You might find it to be a few seconds faster exporting a video in more intensive tasks like video editing or batch editing a bunch of photos, which the iPhone has gotten really good at in recent years. It's a little powerhouse that you can carry in your pocket. The neural engine is up to twice as fast, which powers some of the machine learning features like the new autocorrect transformer language model for more accurate typing, lifting a subject from a photo, or detecting a plant or animal species with the lookup feature. GPU performance for gaming is now up to 20% faster with 6 cores up from 5, they're calling it a Pro class GPU, and it's up to 70% faster than the iPhone 12 GPU if you are coming from an older phone. The performance gains really start to add up after a few generations. It also now supports hardware accelerated ray tracing, which is not new on portable devices, but still really impressive to see on a phone. This gives you much more realistic looking lighting and reflections in games without big hits to performance. It was a big feature of the PS5 and Xbox Series X when those launched just a couple of years ago, and now it's in something small enough to carry with you. They even showed games like Resident Evil and the upcoming Assassin's Creed Mirage, the console version running natively on an iPhone for the first time, so that'll be really interesting to test out in a few months to really put this thing through its paces. Now, the camera is my favourite feature of the iPhone. It's probably my most used, and it's the camera that I always have with me, and I love taking pictures on the go. And there's quite a lot to unpack here. The new chip powers a lot of the new camera features. There doesn't seem to be any major hardware changes this year versus the 14 Pro, except on the 15 Pro Max, which gets a new 5x telephoto. And yet, despite that, there's actually a lot of really cool software stuff that make up for it. There's more to see. So much of what smartphone cameras do nowadays comes from computational photography more so than the actual hardware itself. Things like portrait mode that add a background blur behind a subject. Now that's basically on by default whenever the phone detects a person or a cat or a dog, or if you tap to focus on an object. You'll see this new f-stop icon in the corner telling you that you're also capturing depth information with the photo. So now, after taking it, you can enable the portrait effect. There's no need to think about if you want to take a portrait shot in the moment. You just shoot and decide later. It's completely seamless and doesn't get in the way. That also means that portrait photos can now also be live photos, so you're not losing out on capturing those little moments before and after a photo like before. Last year, the 14 Pro brought a new 48 megapixel quad-layer sensor to the main camera, which by default used pixel binning to combine pixels into a 12 megapixel photo to reduce image noise. This year, the photonic engine on the 15 and 15 Pro defaults to 24 megapixels, so twice the resolution as before for more detailed shots, which you can see if you zoom in. You probably won't notice for quick snaps for social media, but it gives you a lot more scope to crop in and reframe with the extra resolution. And you get to feel like you're getting more use out of that high-resolution sensor. Now, what is interesting is the standard 15 also gets these next-generation portraits and a 48 megapixel sensor with 24 megapixel default photos. Yet that uses last year's A16 Bionic chip from the 14 Pro, which hasn't gotten any of these features as a software update. That's a little sus, Apple. But it has gotten the new 48 megapixel Heath option, so now you don't have to shoot in ProRes to take full resolution 48 megapixel photos. ProRes gives you a lot more image data and dynamic range for editing your photos in post, but with some pretty hefty file sizes, anywhere from 50 to 100 megabytes. Heath gives you that extra resolution in a compressed file that's around 10 times smaller. But it shows that Apple can bring features to older, perfectly capable iPhones when they want to. Just thought that was interesting. Smart HDR5 brings improvements to dynamic range, which I have noticed. The stonework here is much better exposed, with more accurate colours on the 15 versus the 14. And this is Birmingham, England, by the way. I wasn't in Rome. It's pretty dull and cloudy this time of year in the UK, so I've not been able to test this out in harsher, brighter conditions just yet. I've also seen improvements to night mode shots with less noise and a cleaner image with better colour reproduction, like you see here on Ron's hair. On the back of the 15 Pros, you'll count 3 cameras, the ultra-wide, main and telephoto. And yet this year Apple's marketing this as like having 7 camera lenses in one, which has been causing a bit of a debate. You have the macro mode from the ultra-wide, the actual 0.5x ultra-wide with a 13mm focal length, the 1x main at 24mm, which you can now tap to get a 1.2x at 28mm and a 1.5x at 35mm, the 2x crop from the main camera at 48mm, then the 3x or 5x at 120mm on the Pro Max to give us what Apple are calling 7 lenses in total. Now, 3 of these are most definitely sensor crops. They're cropping into that 48 megapixel sensor on the main camera to get you the 28, 35 and 48mm focal lengths. Same goes for the macro mode and the ultra wide. Apple says that they are using different processing techniques on these new focal lengths, and you do still get 24 megapixels from the 28 and 35mm, with 12 megapixels on the 48mm. But it does seem like a bit of an odd way to market this. Like, are they just gonna keep adding more? And I do like that we have these presets. I have been shooting with them. You can even set a default if you like to shoot with a specific one. Now, as I said, the Pro keeps the 3x, but with the extra space that's inside the 15 Pro Max, Apple's put in a new 5x 120mm telephoto. A traditional 120mm camera lens is quite big and long. Apple's using a fancy tetraprism design. Basically, it's a folded glass structure just below the lens that bounces the light rays 4 times before hitting the sensor to allow the light to travel further in a shorter space, giving you that new, longer focal length. This lets you get even closer to subjects off in the distance. I've been loving using this for these architectural shots, capturing shapes and textures. Apple even engineered a new optical image stabilizer module that moves in all 3 directions to help reduce any camera shake. Beyond the 5x, you get up to a 25 times digital zoom for photos, which does look a little bit rough, predictably, but if you do use it, you do get this nice little picture-in-picture in the viewfinder so you can better see exactly what you're looking at. And from 13mm all the way up to 120, this is the longest focal length range that we've ever had in an iPhone. And I really appreciate how smoothly and seamlessly you can switch between them. It's worth pointing out that everything between the 1x and the 5x here on the Pro Max is essentially a sensor crop. So if you really like the 3x from before, then you might miss it here. Worth considering when choosing which model to buy. Also, there's apparently a new anti-reflective coating on the lenses, but that doesn't seem to have done much to get rid of the floating orbs that have been annoyingly present for some time, particularly in darker environments. Now, Apple calls these Pro phones, yet another year passes and we haven't got any real Pro camera controls in the camera app. There's no shutter speed control, no focus slider. We have to rely on third-party camera apps like Blackmagic Cam. But they have added a genuinely impressive Pro feature. The iPhone has always been pushing hard in the video quality department. It's considered by many as the best smartphone for video. And now when shooting in ProRes, you now have an option to shoot in ProRes Log. Straight out the camera, the footage here looks kind of flat and washed out. Like a ProRes photo, Log retains more dynamic range and gives you more scope to push the colours when grading the footage in post. The file sizes here, by the way, are insane. I shot just a minute's worth of footage that came in at 4.4 gigabytes. Thankfully, Apple now lets you plug in an external drive and save directly to that. I've been using this Samsung T7 SSD, and yeah, I've built a little sort of shooting rig using the Moment Filmmaker cage. I'll link to these down in the description. And recording externally unlocks a 4K 60 option in ProRes Log, so yeah, you can fill up your drive to your heart's content. I do use my iPhone to shoot bits of footage here on the channel, or if I need like a couple of cameras rolling at once. And it works, but it always just kind of looks like iPhone footage. One of the big telltales is just how over-sharpened it looks. Log removes all that sharpening, and I've been really impressed by how good it looks. I think it'll make it a lot easier to match iPhone footage to different cameras now. That, along with all of the other improvements, make this an incredibly powerful camera system that you can carry every day. Battery life for me has been so-so compared to last year's 14 Pro Max. I'd say I'm getting slightly longer battery life, but my 14 Pro Max had dropped down to less than 90% battery health, which probably accounts for that. The batteries are actually marginally bigger this year, but nothing notable. Easily enough to last you all day plus a bit in normal use. There is a new optimized charging option in settings to limit the 15 and 15 Pro to 80% charge, which might preserve battery health going forward. And you can now see the number of battery cycles in the About section. But at the time of this video, neither of these features has come to last year's iPhones. Apparently, we just don't have the technology. The Pro starts at $1,000 or pounds for 128 gigs of storage, with the Pro Max starting at $1,200 with 256 gigs. There's no 128 option on the Pro Max this year. I went for the 512 gig option, so I've got lots of space for photos and videos and traveling. When you look at this year's Pro, you do have to kind of go looking for what's actually new here. There's the new titanium finish, the action button, the C port, which I think a lot of people are going to appreciate. Some people might even be a bit confused as to why their old lightning cable won't fit the port this year. But there is more to see, more than meets the eye. You do have to kind of look inside at the new A17 Pro chip, which enables a bunch of really nice quality of life features. The next gen always on portrait mode with live photos, the new 24 megapixel default with the improvements to night mode and HDR processing, which are important to me. The camera is the main reason why I upgraded, plus all of the refinements to an already great design. But for a lot of people, these are just incremental updates. It's fair to say that we're past the point where upgrading your phone every year makes sense unless you really want to get the latest features. If you've got a XS, 11, or even an iPhone 12, then I think you'll really appreciate the culmination of upgrades from the past few years. Things like the 120Hz ProMotion display, the improvements to the triple camera system, and the 10 gigabit USB-C port. And you can get this knowing that it'll be good for the next 5 years or so. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, it really helps the channel out. Let me know what you think of the Pro this year and what you're upgrading from. And if you want to see more tech videos from me, you can hit subscribe and the bell. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.